Smellovision, a history class with its own maker lab. Game designers communicating the values of traditional rural life. A humanities program that positions students in promising careers. And a small college making an outsized impact on our state's cultural heritage. New Mexico Highlands University's Media Arts and Technology Department is all that and more, training students for the challenging, cross-disciplinary, high-tech work that cultural institutions need now and in the future.
Welcome to Augmented Humanity. Our guests are modern explorers working at the intersection of technology and the humanities. They help us to understand ourselves and the worlds we create in this digital age. They are thinkers, creators, makers, and academics, working in diverse fields like linguistics, technology, game and object design, and ethics. I'm your host, Craig Goldsmith.
And I'm your host, Ellen Dornan.
On this program, we're joined by Miriam Langer, artist, maker, and the chair of the Media Arts and Technology Department at New Mexico Highlands University. She's also co-creator of the Museduino, an open-source electronics environment for the creation of interactive exhibits and installations. Lauren Addario teaches emerging technologies design for New Mexico Highlands Media Arts Department. Over the last 10 years, she has partnered with Miriam to map out the Cultural Technology Internship program, which provides media arts students with paid opportunities at museums, libraries, nonprofits, and cultural institutions across the state. Together, they are coordinating assistance to New Mexico cultural organizations affected by the pandemic.
Thank you so much for joining us from your homes. Talking about culture and talking about technology seems like a strange pairing. Can you fill us in a little bit about what cultural technology is?
We have used the term cultural technology for about 15 years now, since we began our partnership with the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. And we have traditionally defined it as using technology to surface culture. So that's why culture is first in the term. And the technology is there in support of things like surfacing collections, making things more accessible, engaging people in a discussion using the tools of technology, which of course, as we know, are ever changing and ever evolving.
What are some examples of surfacing technology, like making collections more accessible?
We started out doing a lot of things about 15 years ago by doing some of the first digitizing of collections for New Mexico museums. So one of the first summer internships way back in, I think, 2005 or 6, was a student photographing potsherds at MIAC, at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. They had thousands of pot shards and they needed to be documented and photographed and digitized. So that was early days, right, when this stuff was very new. And now, sort of fast forwarding, just recently we did a project also in the archaeology space for Jemez Historic Site, where they wanted to showcase objects that were found on that site, and they wanted people to be able to view them in 360. So we did photogrammetry, taking a 360-degree photograph of the object, which allows visitors to zoom in and rotate, look at details of the object itself. So we've done a lot of work with pots, I guess, is one statement there.
Miriam, what do you mean by surfacing the culture?
So we know that in New Mexico, a very small amount of our cultural resources are on display at any time, right? We know that, for example, at the Maxwell Museum or at Santa Fe in the archives, there are just tons of objects and documents and artifacts that just never see the light of day. Sometimes because there are too many and sometimes for conservation concerns. So by doing things like the photogrammetry, which we've done for other things as well, my personal favorite was in 2010 when we got to do photogrammetry of the collection of Bauman puppets at the Museum of Art. Those puppets never come out except for rarely, and you never get to see them move. And to be able to do photogrammetry and then reanimate those puppets using technology was really exciting for me and remains one of my favorite projects we've ever done. Not to say anything bad about the pots. Love the pots.
In the lay sense, surfacing is bringing it to the surface, coming out of the closet with this cool stuff that otherwise is totally inaccessible.
Yeah. And in some cases, it's literally surfacing, right? Like bringing it up out of the basement documenting it, it goes back down into storage, and yet we continue to have access.
I think we can also talk here a little bit about how we use video to collect stories and to collect experiences of individuals in New Mexico who may not have their voices heard otherwise. So we send our students to locations. Well, we can't now, but in the past, we've sent our students to locations to interview World War II vets or veterans of the Cold War, or even makers in the community, and people who, in essence, have a story to tell that maybe would go otherwise unheard.
So sort of oral histories.
And oral history, yeah.
It seems like Highlands is a hotbed for this kind of archival and cultural work. What is going on out there?
Well, first of all, I think I just want to just give a shout out to Miriam, who works really hard, but I think that there's a commitment among the faculty at Highlands to engage with this kind of surfacing of technology and giving people the opportunity and giving New Mexico culture the opportunity to shine in a way that maybe some other locations don't feel necessarily the need to do. So I feel we all feel very strongly about this mission and about the importance of cultural technology in New Mexico. And also, it's a sense of place. People feel connected to New Mexico in a way that maybe that is true for other places, but for certain, it's true in New Mexico.
I'm a little curious because of the student body of New Mexico Highlands. Do those students find it more engaging to approach technology through a cultural lens, or does the technology help them engage with their culture?
It's a little bit of cause and effect, or correlation and causation, because in a sense, we don't really know. Well, we do and we don't. So one thing we have found is that, first of all, when we started this 15 years ago in partnership, we can't not say Mimi's name, right? When Mimi Roberts and I were like, what can we do? It all began very briefly to just say when Governor Richardson at the time was really pushing the film industry in New Mexico, and every university and two-year college was sort of figuring out where they fit in. And I thought we fit in by getting in on the cultural level. And Mimi and I had been talking, and we said, museums and libraries and other cultural institutions really need to be part of what was then called the Media Industry Strategic Plan. And it turned into this long partnership. What we found is our students innately connect to community, right? They come in and they don't necessarily know how, but their first ideas are, I want to tell the stories of my community. I want to tell the story of my family's ranch. One of the early projects that we did was we had a student who was a Navajo rodeo star, and she wanted to tell the story of rodeo on the Navajo reservation. And it turns out when prompted, right, people have stories, they have family stories, they have a long legacy of music, of artisans, of connection to culture of New Mexico. And they didn't know. I think we were the ones who said, hey, you can use your technology skills, your media skills to tell those stories in a way that's really meaningful. And we had to make those connections. They thought they were necessarily like coming to school to design advertising logos and graphic design, or make music videos in video class. But it turns out that bridging that connection wasn't that difficult. And once given the opportunity and the tools to do that, they sort of automatically gravitate there. And I want to be clear, we still see our share of student-made horror films, but we can then take it and extrapolate that and turn that into something else.
We've heard this thread in other contexts on some of these programs also, that a lot of it seems to start with people wanting to tell a story of some kind, and often in New Mexico related to place or culture or history or language, or sometimes stories of exclusion, stories where people feel that there's stories that are not being told or that can't be told in some context. You said when we started this, you mean the media arts department? Do you mean the program?
I guess what I mean is when I started this, my life's work, we'll just call it that. And then I dragged everyone else and made it their life's work, and there may be some regrets. But when I say this, I meant this means our connection to the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs, because that is what grounds the mission of this cultural technology work, is knowing there's a commitment, not just at the university, but right at the level of the Secretary of Cultural Affairs. And that has now gone through several administrations, and the relationship continues, which we were not always sure that it would. But even when their political administrations change, the support of students in some way is regarded as crucial and important. And we've been able to make our case often through that, through the inclusion of student voices.
Your students are very articulate. We've heard some of your students talking about what they've learned, Becca Sharp, for instance, what they've learned in your program or what they've been able to accomplish with the skills that they learned. I actually just wanted to take a couple minutes to go back to one of your original points about the cultural technologies. You're hoping to broaden the use of emerging technology in New Mexico. You're coming from a maker background and doing Arduino development. What are some of the emerging technologies that you guys are getting excited about that you're seeing your students working with?
What we're seeing, especially in our exhibit work, and this is going to come up later when we talk about things like non-touchable surfaces and responsive environments that don't involve people all touching the same screen. But one of the things the students are super excited now is responsive projection mapping, right? Doing projection mapping, responsiveness in space. We've been able to do some of that for Jemez Historic Site. We have done some pop-ups, which have been really fun, where we just do a pop-up at night and map it to whatever building or whatever surface we want to project on. I think that's what the students are really excited about that. We have really started to build our 3D modeling and 3D environment space, and how we use that. This summer's internships are going to be very telling, because there's a demand for those skills this summer, and yet we know we are probably not going to be developing touchscreen interactive. So we're going to be thinking about how these 3D worlds are going to be shared and displayed in different ways.
I have a colleague who does exhibits and touch screens, and they're moving towards gesture mapping now for this. Is that sort of what you mean by a responsive environment that doesn't involve touching?
And I can talk about specific sensors that are being used, but we may have to go deeper into that. But yeah, so the first thing that came along was the Microsoft Kinect. There's now like a run on every old Kinect you can get. So now everyone is like going to old game stores and like buying up as many of these old things as they can. We have a closet full of them, and I shouldn't say
Don't
where.
Tell anybody.
I'm not going to say where that closet is. But also proximity sensing, heat sensing, capacitive sensing, audio inputs, just talking to in an environment and getting a response. There are many ways to do that as well. And this is where I'm going to digress a little bit, but it is really important, and it will feed into what Lauren talks a lot about, which talks about accessibility, which is one of the things that technology always accused of, and this is not without reason, is this instant obsolescence. You spend a ton of money, you make something with all the bells and whistles, and it's super cool, and everyone's blown away. And then 2 years later, it breaks, or no one can fix it, or it's no longer, working for whatever reason. And now we have to face a world that has proliferated with touchscreens and touch tablets and touch tables. And we have to really think about how we're going to repurpose that interaction so that all of that money that especially small museums may have spent thinking this was going to be this great exhibit that everyone would be able to use for years, is no longer usable. We have to think really carefully before we start throwing all those things in the garbage, because a lot of money and a lot of time was put into creating those.
Lauren, Miriam was saying that you were going to talk about some of your web-based stuff in that context.
Yeah. So I teach a class called Design for Emerging Interfaces. And essentially that is about what Miriam was addressing, this idea of non-traditional kind of interfaces. And everybody is enamored with the touchscreen. We know that. It's everywhere. But we want to think about maybe having a more multisensory approach to the way we look at our kind of online or virtual environments. And what I mean by that is incorporating audio for sure, incorporating audio and visual together so that we don't want to privilege any one of the senses. The idea that we have to think about also captioning. We have to think about reading. We have to think about ways that we engage people that thinks about their kind of strengths and perhaps weaknesses. So I address those things, and I have them think very seriously about accessibility when designing anything that involves interaction with a user.
And I think we want to start underprivileging touch maybe for a little bit.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah, we're going to have to. Absolutely.
You're listening to Augmented Humanity. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Augmented Humanity.
So, Lauren, I wanted to start out with you. You teach the Design for Emerging Interfaces course, which is such an exciting course title. I can't get over it. And we're talking about how for a while the touch screens were the coolest thing, but we're realizing that when people start returning to museums, they're maybe going to be wary of touch screens, or it may be challenging for museum staff to maintain touch screen cleanliness in a crowded museum. So what are some of the really cool projects that you've seen that, as you said, incorporate different senses or don't prioritize any one sense over the others, but that avoid the touch screen paradigm?
I'm going to actually talk about a multisensory exhibit that our students put together as part of our Cultural Technology Internship class. And the idea was that we wanted to make an accessible exhibit that didn't privilege any one of the senses. So the students really, they worked with Leslie Kadish. Yeah, at the time she was at the Smithsonian, and we did a collaborative project with her. She came and visited the students and talked about multisensory experiences, and the students really took that to heart, and they designed an experience where you would walk into the room, and yes, there was Braille on the wall for individuals who could not see, but there was also smell. And with smell, of course, comes taste. There were orange peels. There was traditional scents of New Mexico, so juniper and sage and pinon and some of the kind of prominent smells of New Mexico. And then you would move through the exhibit and you were also, yes, able to touch some of these things. And that was part of it. And then there was a projection from the ceiling. And as you stood in front of the projection, you blocked out certain points of light and you were able to create your own kind of visual experience on the floor. So the students took advantage of projection, and this is before projection mapping. So they kind of created their own artistic installation using projection from the ceiling. And then there was a video, and the video had a woman who interpreted a poem actually in ASL, and then the woman reading the poem held up beads that had the actual words to the poem going across the screen. So in this way, people were able to move through the space and experience the space without privileging any one of the senses. So that was a turning point, I think, for me and also for a lot of the students to start thinking about ways to engage with spaces that don't involve using a screen.
So I've seen a lot of research that suggests when people visit a museum or like a national park. Say they're at the edge of the Grand Canyon and they have the wind in their face and they're seeing the geology and they're hearing the wind in the trees or whatever. And that multisensory experience results in a more meaningful learning experience, where the longitudinal impact of what you learn at that time stays with you. You'll remember your trip your whole life. That seeing the thing or having it be real to you with more than one sense makes it more impactful. And I was wondering whether you have gotten feedback from some of your student projects about how that incorporation of multisensory modalities impacts your visitors.
The student project that Lauren is describing, which was very successful, and I just want to, they ended up presenting it with students at the Museum Computer Network conference. I have no idea what year. I want to say 2015, but I could be wrong. They had an opportunity to present it and to really talk about the role of that as multisensory exhibits started taking off a little bit more. But we did a project at the Bradbury Science Museum, which was the exhibit associated with the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. As you may know, most of the historic properties associated with the Manhattan Project National Historical Park in Los Alamos, it's also in 2 other locations, are, in this case in New Mexico, they're all behind the fence. They're behind the fence at Los Alamos. You cannot actually visit them. So in designing an experience where people would get to experience them, rather than have a small screen, we built a 180-degree screens and we shot 360-degree video of those buildings. And then we incorporated scent. Just shout out to Becca. This is a project that Becca led. She gets to be referred to all the time. She got an old card catalog that was in, a closet at Los Alamos. And as the 180-degree screen was showing the 360 video of these buildings that you cannot visit, it would instruct you to open up a drawer in the card catalog. And in that drawer, there would be a scent, an artifact, or audio component so that you would have a complementary multisensory experience along with this large format 180-degree video. So what we know about that from Linda Deck, the director of the Bradbury, is that people really enjoyed opening the drawers and having that sense of discovery along with this large format video that they were seeing, and that's still up there and you can experience it. That was sort of our first official using scent in a permanent exhibit in that way.
Something I've noticed already in this discussion is that both of you continually say that you're designing experiences and not exhibits. What I'm hearing is that you're designing experiences, because exhibits implies that people, like you were saying, they're on the other side of a fence or they're on the other side of a plexiglass window looking at a diorama, as opposed to having an experience. And also hearing both of you talking about at different times today already about scent, I think is so crucial and is often underutilized. The smells, that's something that just takes you back as a memory almost immediately. When you were talking about the card catalog, at first I thought that musty old card catalog smell, and I was like, that it actually evoked in me immediate memories and experiences. 10 years ago, maybe, I know that there was a company that had developed a digital smellorama device. It came with like 64 vials of stuff and you could smell pixels.
Can I tell my great Los Alamos scent story? Because it is so great. Poor Lauren has heard this story about 1,000 times. She's heard every story 1,000 times, so whatever. Okay, so we were working on this project for Los Alamos, and this is going to come back to your point, Craig, about the Smellophone. And we are working with the historian, and we said, we want to do something with scent, and they were involved. So they said, okay, we're going to go through the diaries of the scientists and workers, and we're going to see anywhere that they refer to scent. And there were quite a few. And some of them seemed very easy to replicate. The smell of burning coffee, the smell of burning wood. But one of them really stumped us, and it was a reference repeatedly to the smell of overheating electronics. Now, we all know what that smell is, right?
The magic smoke.
Yeah. And I make that smell by accident all the time in my electronics lab, but I didn't know how to bottle it and put it in a card catalog for visitors to experience. So Lauren and I have a friend we've worked with a lot out in LA who sort of comes from the creative haunted house world. And I said, Chris, we need this to bottle the smell of burning electronics. How do we do that? And he was like, I think I know someone who can help you. And he introduced me via email to this woman, Saskia Wilson Brown. She's a very close friend now. She runs the nonprofit called the Institute for Art and Olfaction. And he gave me her email and did an intro. And I wrote to her and I said, I know this is really weird, but we need to bottle the smell of overheated electronics. And she wrote back immediately and she said, that's so strange that you're the second person in 2 days to ask me for that scent. And she sent me the formula and, a resource to get it. It was a mixture of 4 compounds and they arrived. It worked. It smelled so much like overheating electronics that one of the students was like, we have to call security. The lab's on fire. Anyway, it works and it's great. So time passes and this is the punchline. So I said, Saskia came to visit and work with our students. She comes every year now. And I asked her, I was like, do you remember when I wrote you and you said that somebody else had asked you for this scent? And she said, yeah, there's this guy and he's a writer and an artist. And he had been interviewing people who had allegedly been abducted by aliens. And every single one of them said that during the abduction, they smelled 2 scents, overheated electronics and wet cardboard. And that was why she had the formula ready to go. That's how we met Saskia. And that's how we sort of actually started really incorporating scent as a cultural tool, as a central way of addressing cultural technology through different delivery methods, through incorporation on paper, in audio pieces, and other things as well.
The one point I want to revisit is that's a really interesting approach to go through the archives and find the scents that people found remarkable at the time. I think it goes back to what you were saying about wanting to surface some of these collections or surface some of this culture. So when you go to work with different collections, how do you teach your students to collaborate? I mean, what does that look like if a student has to go, say, work with Jemez Historic Site or work with Los Luceros when they need to figure out what emerging technology or what paradigm to apply to that place or that collection?
Well, first off, in our classes, we bring in guest speakers and experts. And I think that from that point, they begin to develop a relationship with some of these experts in the field. And we work really hard to cultivate that for the students and to encourage them to communicate with people outside of just our academic world so that they are used to now, I think, going and talking directly to the people who know and can help them solve some of their problems and research some of their questions that they might have.
That's great that you picked that up. You're such a humanities personnel. You just picked it right up. But one of the things that's great is that when we come in to do a project, we know that our students are not necessarily content experts on whatever the topic is. And so they have to learn to communicate and ask the right questions so that we can provide a technology or multimedia solution that doesn't just like shove a technology answer to the wrong question, right? Are we asking the right questions? So we collaborate with humanities specialists all the time. Historians, writers, archaeologists. This is a crucial aspect of how we do our exhibit design work. So, for example, at Jemez Springs, redoing the visitor center just last year, we worked with the 2 archaeologists that were there on site. We worked with tribal elders, tribal storytellers, the interpretive staff at Jemez, most of whom are tribal members, artists, especially potters, who told us the story of the history of pottery making out there at Jemez. We talked to musicians. So we got an opportunity to hear all of this and then take that back into our lab and think, how are we going to really honor these stories, these narratives, the archaeology, the history through the tools that we have?
It seems crucial that technology serves the experience or serves the story rather than let's do a video projection mapping thing because video projection mapping is so cool. And what I'm hearing is that you really want to see your students in particular, it sounds like, get trained to think about the story and the experience first and what story they're trying to tell. Is that about right? That's a tricky bit of business there.
Yeah, That seems right. That's right.
That's accurate, though, for sure.
You're listening to Augmented Humanity. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Augmented Humanity.
I wanted to start out by talking about your response to your partners in the Department of Cultural Affairs to their needs during this time, which clearly has closed all the museums and the historic sites.
I think Miriam and I actually probably had this idea at the same time, which was the first thing we needed to do was to help our cultural partners. And when we realized that everything was going to be closed for the foreseeable future and the future was kind of uncertain for New Mexico museums and cultural institutions, we knew that we had technology solutions to help them out. And we knew that our students had the skills to help them out. We put out a call through Doug Patinka, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Cultural Affairs. We asked him to put out a call within their internal listserv to say that we would offer emergency cultural services at no cost to their museum while still providing a stipend to our students to help them with some immediate technology needs. So getting things online quickly, figuring out ways that they could either create virtual tours or video tours or even podcasts. You know, the educators really needed to get their lesson plans online, and many of them are using PowerPoints and not taking full advantage of the tools that are available to them. So we got 15 or so responses from New Mexico museums, and we were able to help out 14 of those. One of them, they really required a student to be on site, which obviously we can't do. Just to name them all, because I think it's important that we give them a shout out: the New Mexico Museum of Art, the National Hispanic Cultural Center, the Santa Fe Children's Museum, the City of Las Vegas Museum, 516 Arts, the Bradbury Science Museum, the Coronado Historic Site, the Museum of International Folk Art, Las Golondrinas, a couple of other historic sites. I think that's it for now. So we paired a student with the museum and we assigned them 150 hours to work with whomever the museum deemed the kind of point person, and they will help them with whatever needs they have.
What do some of those needs look like? Can you give a real specific example of maybe what your students are doing?
So Coronado Historic Site is an example of that. And the educator there, Adrienne Boggs, has been creating online lesson plans using the content that she has available to her. Of course, she can't go and take photographs or shoot video or do any of the things that she needs to do. But fortunately, in 2015, we did a PICT project there, the Program for Interactive Cultural Technology that Miriam mentioned earlier that we did with Hema's historic site. We have a hard drive full of photos and video and material that she can hopefully use to get some of her instruction materials online. And we've assigned 2 students to work with her to help her do just that. And then, for example, the educator at 516 Arts, they have an exhibit up right now, Chromatica, and they are experimenting with ways to kind of put that exhibit online and get educational resources out around that exhibit. And what she's done is put together a PDF and put it up on the site. Well, a PDF is great for starters, but it's not accessible, right? In other words, screen readers can't read the text. It's not an accessible document. So we're going to work with her to create an accessible online experience for people who want to visit that exhibit.
When you say accessible, in the technical sense, you mean accessible to people that may have like a visual impairment or an auditory impairment or something like that. You don't mean that I can't pull it up on my laptop.
That's exactly right.
Because it's on the dark web. Okay.
That's exactly right. When I talk about accessibility, I'm talking very specifically about meeting accessibility guidelines. Right. So El Rancho de las Golondrinas, they already put 360 images up on their website, and they did this with Google in like 2016 or something. One of the staff members there put on a backpack and went around and took photographs of, 360 images of Las Golondrinas. So they have them right now on Google Maps, but we're going to have a student go in and get those 360 images and add through Google Tour Creator, which is a prepackaged program, go in and add narration and visual aids and audio. So there can be ambient audio, there can be any kind of sound effects they might want to create. So just an enhanced way of looking at the museum online. Let's see, this came to us prior to the Emergency Cultural Services, and Linda Deck, of course, a longtime collaborator and supporter of our program at the Bradbury Science Museum, is updating a supercomputing exhibit, and she needs some kind of short animations to help guide people through the supercomputing exhibit and help them kind of understand some complex terms that are used in supercomputing. This, of course, is kind of perfect because those animations can exist inside the museum in the space, or they can exist on the web. So that turns out to fit in with what we're doing currently. And you can tell the things that I get excited about is actually, is actually figuring out what the museums need and then matching the students to that and figuring out how to solve the problem. So the City of Las Vegas Museum was going to put together an exhibit on kind of old school games and toys. Of course, they can't have the exhibit now. So what they are going to do instead is create in Unity these games virtually so that people can understand what the kind of premise was to these games and actually how they played it. For them, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do immersive VR, but you can create this in non-immersive VR with using Unity.
Unity being the world-building immersive software video game?
Yeah, platform. The Santa Fe Children's Museum, they've adapted by doing virtual field trips. So they want kind of short animations or artwork to augment these virtual field trips. They have subjects and curricula already defined in space science, gardening, indigenous recipes, animals, water. And so the students will then create some artwork or short animations that they will post to enhance their online material that's already there. There are exhibits that are currently ongoing at the Museum of International Folk Art, at the New Mexico Museum of Art, and our students are working to put that content online in the form of a website. And that's more of a kind of traditional way of thinking about how you would take an exhibit and put it online, although it's very interesting to talk through with the curators what they want to see go online and kind of what might be interesting to a viewer who might have a limited attention span and not want to go so deep into the subjects as the curator would like. So we're having those discussions as well. And National Hispanic Cultural Center has several exhibits that are currently on display that people can't see. So they're going to have their videographer go in and do a video tour of the exhibit, and then we'll have our students edit it.
What a phenomenal amount of work. So I'm curious, because you're talking about how you're primarily matching your students with these organizations to help them do this. You're choosing the students and sort of trying to match them with the organization for whom they'd be a good fit. It's like a little bit of matchmaking.
In this case, yes, that is what we're doing, only because in the interest of timeliness and speed.
It's kind of a broad question because you've talked about a lot of specific projects, but they may help them come up with the idea of what they're going to do, but they may also help them execute it, use the technology or leverage technology that the people at the organization might not be well versed in. Am I
Absolutely.
understanding that correctly?
Yep, you're understanding that correctly. Yes.
In a lot of ways, the pandemic has been difficult and unfortunate, but what a way to boost your students into the future.
Particularly for those students who are graduating, they are probably more rapidly than expected having to re envision what their post graduation life is going to look like.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, because they may have been thinking of themselves as a particular kind of experience or exhibit designer or what have you. These things are closed now and things will open again, but I don't think that they'll open again in the same way. Whatever this was, this pandemic, when we look back on it, there's going to be something else. I think that people that do what your students are doing, what you're doing, what we all are actually trying to do, even with this program, I think that there's going to be other events or scenarios that are going to occur either locally or across the planet. They're going to force everybody to sort of shift how and what they're doing, and very quickly. And I think it's actually probably really a good experience for your students because they're going to need to be nimble.
No, absolutely. I think Miriam alluded to this earlier. Technology changes so quickly. And so you can't really teach necessarily specific software or specific technologies, but you want to teach the students how to adapt and how to think about what might come next.
On that front, I mean, when you're sort of taking a big picture of design thinking or approach to designing museum interactions or cultural interactions, you guys have been consulting with the institutions about their needs. But you were mentioning how people visiting a museum website may have different needs or different attention spans in terms of how they experience the exhibit or how they do a virtual tour. Have you been able to get a sense of how people want to be connecting with museums and cultural institutions right now?
I don't think I can address that specifically as much as I can address that broadly, which is we're spending a lot of time in front of the computer and a lot of time interacting with the screen. And I feel that we need to be mindful of getting the content kind of front and center so that we're not taking up a lot of extra time for people who are trying to navigate this very kind of new level of engagement with a screen.
So that sort of translates maybe to simplified interfaces, or?
To me, it translates universally into accessibility, which is all about making things easy to perceive, easy to operate, easy to understand, right?
And like you said, multimodal. So you have your alt text, you have your audio, you have something to see, something to hear, something to read.
Absolutely.
Now, if I can just get the Smellovision on my USB port there, would be set.
I will take it back to Scent whenever you let me, Craig.
I have to know if you have a closet full of smellophones.
I have boxes and boxes full of scents. They aren't smellophones. So I'm channeling Saskia from the Institute of Art and Olfaction when I say this, which is there are a lot of people working on a new version of that, right? That was like this thing of people had this idea. Oh, Ellen, I'm drinking this cup of coffee at Zendo. I wish you could be here with me to smell it. And then I send you it and on your smellophone. But of course, you're just smelling a generic coffee scent. You're not smelling what I'm smelling. So the idea of what that means with both taste and smell. I was just actually reading an article about someone who's trying to do a version of smell where you like put this thing on your tongue and it squirts out a little bit of bitter, a little bit of sweet. And it's supposed to be like, oh, I'm having this cake. I wish you could taste it too. So I'm super interested in that. And I just want to add actually quickly to what Lauren said, which is we're doing all this stuff and getting the students work. And there's an irony to this as well, right? Which is our students who were all sent home and couldn't come to face-to-face classes for the last 6-7 weeks. They're so enthusiastic about helping museums do all this. And at the same time, every time we talk to them, they just miss each other so much. We're a really collaborative program. We're a super collaborative face-to-face environment. And they have been super good sports about just making that pivot to being in Zoom and in our virtual classrooms, but they really miss each other. They make a note of that all the time. And what Lauren is also trying to do as she pairs the students up with cultural institutions is also give each student a sort of unofficial partner right? Another person who will sort of have their back and be there for them. And even though she teaches a class and all the students will be communicating in the virtual space weekly throughout their internships, that missing sense of, who am I working with? Who's going to be there to help me out is really something we've noticed a lot. The students are really yearning to be in that tactile, physical space with each other and have those casual interactions that lead to some of the best ideas.
You're listening to Augmented Humanity. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Augmented Humanity. I would just like to start this segment where we're going to talk a little bit about some specific tools and practices. Tell me about Museduino.
This had its origins in 2015. I was doing a lot of Arduino workshops and a lot of Arduino development for museum exhibits with my colleagues at what we call the Cultural Technology Development Lab, which is a little sort of unofficial subset of the Center for Cultural Technology. And we started just thinking about how often we were asked for versions of the same thing, like you walk through the door and an audio is triggered. And we were like, why are are we coming up with these proprietary solutions? We can open source this and make it easier. So we love the Arduino. It's an open source, very inexpensive, easy to learn hardware platform. So we built a shield. It sits on the Arduino, and it's also anything with the same form factor. And it basically allows you to extend the footprint using very cheap off-the-shelf solutions like Cat5 cable, right? Ethernet cable. People think wireless is great. Wireless is a real drag in a museum. There are lots of people with other devices that interfere, electromagnetic signals. So using Ethernet cable, we can expand the footprint of an interactive installation. The sensor could be at the door. As people walk in, there could be a motor that turns the display 100 feet away with no data lag. So it was really just a way that we could streamline the whole thing. I've developed it with my colleagues, Stan Cohen and Ryan Trujillo. They have been fantastic to work with, and we've been able to do workshops at a lot of conferences. It's been really fun, and it's really just been more of a labor of love in terms of making a contribution to the open source community.
Again, this is more for the listeners, the Arduino being an open source electronics and programming environment. And then shields are their sort of standard where you can plug other boards onto your like little Arduino motherboard. And so there's a whole ecology of people that produce these shields. You're actually having these shields manufactured somewhere?
Actually, we make the boards. We design the boards using KiCad, right? It's an open source PCB and design environment. And then we send them off to be printed here in Colorado. And then we solder them ourselves. That way we can give them to people as kits. So for schools and stuff who want to use them and they don't want to pay for us to do the soldering, we use through-hole components so that kids can solder them. There's not that much soldering, and that way we can sort of give them away with a bag of parts and a set of instructions.
But that's actually a really cool approach anyway, I think, because that gets people close to the metal. Building the kit and then making the kit go, I think, is such a crucial hands-on experience for creating physical objects. Given the pandemic, is it only kits at this point?
A lot of our suppliers, our electronic suppliers, you may know this, have switched to making PPE, which is what they should be doing. So they're not fulfilling electronics orders. So if you can. Shout out to Adafruit, one of our main electronic suppliers, Lamore Freed and her team, just cranking out the PPE face shield. So they're not shipping electronics now, and that's fine. We can wait.
Yeah.
You're talking about open source development. You're talking about open source hardware platforms. And it's clear to me how those contribute to that multidisciplinary collaboration that you need to have in order to make these projects happen. But how are you supporting this intergenerational, multidisciplinary collaboration among your students at a time when people can't be coming together in person to collaborate?
I think there's a couple ways this can happen, and this is going to happen as we go forward. So first of all, through our internship program, the students are collaborating with museum staff to teach them the technology they need to get their content online. And in turn, the students get experience of modeling of what it means to be a professional in the world or what it means to be a grown-up in the world. So our students are transitioning from the awkward stage of being a student into being an adult. And I think that pairing these students with experts in their field is really important for their development and for their growth. In terms of other ways that intergenerational learning is happening or may happen as we go forward, there's going to have to be collaborative spaces where this happens. And I have to admit, I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. Right now, we're in a collaborative space and it's fine, but people of different generations navigate collaborative spaces very differently. And I think that we have to be mindful of that and mindful of what it means for somebody to be a digital native versus somebody to be coming to this or having learned it later in life, and the comfort level of how people will work together. So I think that in this case, the younger generation has a lot to teach the older generation about ways to collaborate. And conversely, I think that things like listening and the rhythm and cadence of conversation is a skill that I think maybe people of a certain age have that's very different from younger people. So I notice, for example, in our classroom situations, it takes a while for people to connect to their audio and to talk. And so there's this almost uncomfortable space that happens between when they're connecting to their audio and when we're waiting. And I'm okay. I'm comfortable with that space. I can tell that not everybody is. It's a difference in rhythm. It's a difference in cadence. And I think we're going to have to maybe learn a different way of listening and communicating in a collaborative space.
When you say that comfortable with that space, you mean the waiting?
The awkwardness.
Mm-hmm. I'm perfectly comfortable with it. But then again, I am a drummer. I pay attention to rhythm. I pay attention to pattern. I pay attention to the overall arc of pattern. And I'm okay with it. But I understand that it's not okay for a lot of people.
The space between the notes.
Absolutely.
I'm a little curious about negotiating the channels of communication. Younger people may say, I'm not comfortable talking on the telephone. I find it difficult to talk on the telephone and pay attention. I've heard younger people say, I don't read my emails. It doesn't occur to me to check my email. And I've heard older people say, there's no way I'm going to text. I mean, is this something you support your students with? If their museum buddy just wants to email and that's difficult for them, can you help them find alternate solutions or a middle ground?
The email thing is something that's very interesting because we've been talking about it in our department for a long time, how the students don't read their email and it doesn't occur to them. And I think part of it is email carries the weight of official communication. And it is also in many ways for my students associated with fear that you owe money on your tuition bill, fear that you failed the class. No, I have spent a lot of time trying to get to the bottom of this. As someone who's we've been using email forever and it's just the norm. I think for our students, it represents growing up and entering this world of official communication. And for them, a lot of it is associated with unpleasant things, particularly like being harassed because you owe money on your tuition bill or whatever, or you have an overdue phone bill. And in this current situation, we've had to really say email communication is coming through official channels. We have to get over that fear. You have to accept it. At the same time, time, we also have had our most successful pandemic closure communication with our students through our Instagram. We were just like, this is how it's going to be. The students have been arranging student-only Zoom hangouts on our department Zoom channel. Just they want to see each other. And a lot of it has just been doing homework together in the Zoom environment. It turns out I'm not there. We're not welcome. But, they're saying, oh, we're chatting, but mostly we're just doing homework, but we're just sort of in that same virtual space. And so they're putting it out on our Instagram. They get it through text. But we have had to really have a serious talk about the email associations that are really negative. You have to start to let that go because it's inevitable that stuff is coming down that way.
I actually hadn't thought about it till you said it, that adult communication is email-y or email is adulting communication. And I think there's a lot to be said for communicating with people on the channel that they're comfortable with, especially if you're trying to reach them. But there's also, I think it's fine to have, in any context actually, expectations as well. You may not like meetings, but if meetings are part of your job, then you got to go to the meeting and hopefully learn to navigate it without having a panic attack.
It also brings me back around to what we were talking about with accessibility and making sure that people have equal access to whatever environment you're presenting, and that access has enough varied and meaningful input modalities or sensory modalities so that people who learn in different ways or people who intake information in different ways can get it. What are your concerns about student accessibility in terms of being able to help support them with these projects and just check in on their work and monitor them without infringing on privacy or without requiring them to have technology beyond what they may have in their homes?
We've taken some proactive steps to ensure that our students have equitable access. I'm going to let Miriam talk about the specifics because she actually worked with our facilities manager at the department to get the students the equipment they needed.
So I want to say the first thing we did when we knew that the students were being sent home, we basically emptied our labs. We let them take our iMacs and our cameras and everything that we're normally extremely protective of out. And so we just started arranging distribution of our best computers and our best equipment. And our facilities manager, Mary, who is amazing, was super on board, got it all checked out. That was very heroic. And now the less heroic part is getting it all back. So I don't know how we're going to do that. Then we did another thing, and we used our foundation account that we have, which is just donors have given us money over the years. And we started letting the students turn in their internet bills. So the students turn in their bills and they are reimbursed for the remaining part of the semester. And we'll continue that for the summer for any student who needs it. We're hoping that after May 15th, even though we may not be able to congregate in groups, that students will be able to have access to our building again and access to our equipment in a controlled and careful way. So that might mean maybe 2 students can work on a project in a lab together as long as we're careful and we follow protocol. We don't know yet, but we were really proactive right away in just getting the equipment and telling the students that we would support them and help them pay for their access. It's a really big deal to expect a student to have internet capacity that they're paying for, especially if they're going home to a remote location. Our students often live out on the ranch, out in Mora, out in Villanueva, wherever, and some of them just don't have access. And in that case, we've worked really hard with our students to have other ways of communication, even if it's just sending instructions via email. I think all teachers everywhere have been incredible, and New Mexico teachers all over the country really stepping in and finding ways to get to their students when at all possible. It's been really difficult in many cases on the student side as well. What does it mean to allow your teachers and peers visually into your home? I've thought a lot about that, and we've played around with doing things like making custom backgrounds for the virtual backgrounds in Zoom so that all the students have something that's their own, or we all have the same one. But it's a very complicated thing when work and home and school are now all one thing, and it's complicated across many lines.
These sorts of things may sort of be a little feedback loop for the work that they're going to do, hopefully professionally. I mean, in a way, a video conference or like what we're doing, a collaborative podcast recording session is in itself designing an experience in a way.
Your reflection exercises on this internship program are going to be fascinating.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Get back to us in 2 months. We'll have something to say then.
This has just been a delightful and enlightening conversation. I can't thank you both enough for being with us virtually, as it were. If you would like more information about the Center for Cultural Technology and about some of the work that both our guests are doing, you can visit cctnewmexico.org. Augmented Humanity is a program of the New Mexico Humanities Council, produced in partnership with KUNM-FM. You can visit us online and find out more about our programs at nmhumanities.org. Our theme music comes courtesy James Whiten, and we've had production assistance from Tristan Klum.